So I'm building my personal understanding that racism has destroyed progressive policies and progressive coalitions throughout U.S. history. Currently, I'm focused on Reconstruction and in the ways that the insertion of the word male and the promotion of black men's right to vote had prominent women's rights activists like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady, Stanton feel as though that they had to participate in the degradation of black people in general to promote white women's right to vote above all else and their power within U.S. society. And I would be remiss if I didn't try to at least acknowledge why the Committee of 15, I think was their name, made this compromise on not just promoting universal suffrage, but first trying to focus on the male portion of it. Now, one thing to acknowledge is that the history of the United States is what are you willing to compromise on in order to get things done? And I think that that's a sad reality of the world that we live in, but we're going to go forward. So, in order to understand why they added the word male and why they focused on black men, we need to go back to the 3/5 compromise, right? In which they talk about how representatives, and this is from primary source, representative constitution, representatives in direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, and then they include indentured servants, and then they say 3/5 of all of the persons. Those other persons were black men, right? Now, the reason why this is going to be an issue is because as those states are readmitted, there are no longer any official slaves after the 13th Amendment. And so you no longer have, I would say, the black population that is counted in, I think, the representative math, right, to determine how much legislative power you have. It's no longer being intentionally suppressed, right? In which case it's going to go up by 40%, which could pose a problem to this now, I guess, the radical Republicans and how they wanted to reform this government, in which you could have the Democrats, if they are readmitted, having such a surge of numbers that they could, I guess, hamper any ability of Congress to try and pass any more legislation. And that's a problem, right? Because it would not make sense immediately after the Civil War and how you're going towards some of these radical ideas like getting rid of slavery, trying to deal with voting rights, trying to deal with who deserves protection. And you allow the people that committed treason against the country to now have more legislative power than you. And so they put a compromise in, right? How do we make sure that these people are going to try and at least acknowledge how America has to change now that the war is over? And I know some people are going to say, we don't really enforce Section 2 anymore. I got this, but this was the consideration in 1868, if I have that date right. Now, representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. And but when the right to vote at any election for choice of electors for president and vice president of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state, being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. So it's a compromise that is trying to make sure that any southern states that get readmitted don't try and immediately take away the rights of, I think, black men within their state, while also using their numbers to boost up their legislative, I would say, legislative, I guess, percentages within the halls of Congress. And it's not a fair compromise, right? But it is something to consider, right? These people, I think, they, again, Committee of 15, wanted to make sure that southern states that came in back into the Union did not immediately use the 40% increase in the freed person population, in total person population, to then get more representatives to hamper the legislative plans of what we call, I think today, the radical Republicans. But as I'm going back, this was considered a personal affront to Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And without even acknowledging the dangers that you could have in a society in which you give more power legislatively to the people that just enacted treason, they immediately went racist, right? And they didn't acknowledge how that needed to be shored up before they could do anything else. And then they delayed, I think, their own the acceptance of their rights within American society by believing that white racist slave owners and just white racist men would essentially want them to have the right to vote, when instead they were more conservative, which means they did not want to change anything. The men who these two individuals teamed up with, they were conservatives. They wanted to conserve the way that society existed back then. And so the idea of women's rights was not something that they were going to abide to. And the fact that they supported it just meant that they wanted to split, I think, the power of like a progressive coalition of we'll say black men, black women, and white women who are all advocating for a change in who gets rights and whose rights are respected within America. And there was no consideration of trying to make sure that you don't have your progress halted. And so we see this happen time and time again, right? You advocate for a change. There needs to be something done to make sure that change is even possible. And then white people, because they get anxious that they're not first in line, blow up everything. So, yeah.